The desert was wide and empty, burning under two suns. The sand looked endless, stretching far in every direction. A group of alien villagers moved slowly, their faces hard, their voices cold. In the center of them was a young alien girl. Her hands were tied, her clothes torn, and her eyes filled with fear. She struggled, but the ropes cut into her skin. The villagers pulled her forward, ignoring her cries. She begged them to stop, but no one listened. To them, she was cursed, a burden, a shame on their people. She could not give children, and for that, they decided she must die. They reached a deep pit in the sand. Without mercy, they pushed her inside. She fell hard, sand covering her face and filling her mouth. She coughed and tried to stand, but the ropes kept her weak. One by one, the villagers began to throw sand over her body. The grains burned against her skin, burying her slowly. She screamed for her mother, for anyone to help, but her people turned away. The chief raised his hand, his voice flat and final. "Let the desert take her. She is no longer one of us." The girl's heart pounded as the sand rose higher. First to her knees, then her waist, then her chest. Each breath grew shorter, each cry weaker. The heat of the suns pressed down, making the air heavy and cruel. She begged again, promising she would do anything, live quietly, serve them, but no one moved. Her own family looked away, ashamed, refusing to meet her eyes. With every shovel of sand, she felt her hope breaking apart. By the time they buried her up to her neck, only her face remained above the ground. The villagers turned and left, their shadows long on the sand. No one looked back. The sound of their footsteps faded until there was only silence and the hiss of hot wind. The girl blinked against the burning sun, her lips cracking, her throat dry. Tears rolled down her cheeks, mixing with the dust. She tried to move, but the sand held her tight, heavy like stone. She felt like the earth itself was swallowing her, pulling her down into darkness. Hours passed slowly. The suns moved across the sky, the heat growing sharper, stabbing her skin. Her mind spun with fear. She thought of her childhood, of the small games she once played, of the laughter she would never hear again. She thought of her father's face, the way he once carried her on his shoulders. Now that same father had watched her burial without a word. The pain in her chest was heavier than the sand. As night began to fall, the cold came fast. The desert shifted from fire to ice, and the girl shivered, unable to cover herself. She tried to call for help, her voice breaking into whispers. The stars above looked endless, but they gave no comfort. She wondered if she would die before morning, her body frozen in the sand, her face eaten by wild creatures. She closed her eyes, waiting for death to come. Far away, another figure moved through the desert. A human man walked alone, his steps heavy, his eyes empty. His clothes were worn, his beard uncut, and his face looked tired from endless nights without sleep. He carried nothing but a broken water skin and the weight of his grief. His wife and child had died months ago, taken by war, and since then he had wandered without a home, without a reason. He had stopped caring where his feet carried him. To him, life felt like an endless desert, a place where nothing mattered. But on this night, as the winds carried across the dunes, he heard something. A faint cry, thin and trembling, almost lost to the cold air. He stopped, frowning. At first, he thought it was only the sound of the wind, but then it came again, a desperate whisper, a weak call for help. His heart jumped. For the first time in months, he felt something stir inside him. Without thinking, he began to move toward the sound, climbing over the dunes, following the broken voice. The girl opened her eyes when she heard the crunch of footsteps in the sand. Her heart raced. She thought her people had returned to finish the burial. Fear gripped her throat. But then she saw a tall shadow against the stars, a figure unlike her own kind. The closer he came, the clearer she saw him. A human, strange, dangerous, the same creatures her people always warned her about. She wanted to scream, to tell him to go away, but her voice was too weak. Only a whisper escaped her lips. The man stopped a few steps away, his eyes widening as he saw her buried in the ground. For a moment he said nothing, only staring as if he could not believe what he was seeing. A girl, left to die, abandoned in the sand. The human's hands trembled. He remembered the graves of his wife and child, at the way he could do nothing to save them. The sight before him struck deep into his heart, cutting sharper than a blade. The girl looked at him, her lips shaking. "Please," she whispered, barely able to breathe. "Don't leave me." The desert was silent. The human stared at her for another long moment, his grief battling with his fear. She was alien, not his kind, maybe even dangerous. But her eyes were the same as his daughter's on the day she cried for help. His hands curled into fists, his jaw tight. For the first time since he lost everything, he felt fire in his chest again. He stepped forward, dropped to his knees, and began to dig. His fingers clawed at the sand until his nails tore and his hands bled. Each scoop felt endless, but he did not stop. The girl gasped weakly as the pressure on her chest began to ease. Grain by grain, he pulled her free, his breath loud in the quiet desert night. The human's heart pounded in his ears, not from fear, but from urgency. He remembered how helpless he felt when death took his own family, and he refused to feel that again. The girl coughed as her shoulders came free, her skin pale and trembling in the cold night air. She tried to speak, but only a broken sound escaped her throat. Fear flashed in her eyes. She had heard stories about humans, how they were cruel, violent, and untrustworthy. Now one was crouched before her, digging her out of her grave. She did not know if she was safer or in even greater danger. At last, he freed her arms. She tried to push him away, but she was too weak. Her hands shook like leaves in the wind, barely able to move. He caught her wrist gently, his grip firm but not cruel, and whispered, "Don't fight. I'm not here to hurt you." His voice was low, rough, but steady, carrying the weight of someone who had already lost too much. Finally, with one last effort, he pulled her legs free from the sand. She collapsed against him, too weak to stand. He lifted her in his arms, surprised by how light she felt, as if the desert had already stolen half of her strength. Her head rested against his chest, and for a moment she closed her eyes, too tired to resist. The human looked around the empty dunes. The night was growing colder, the wind sharp. She would not survive until morning if he left her here. He shifted her weight on his back and began to walk. Each step sank deep into the sand, heavy with her frail body, but he did not stop. He moved toward the dark outline of a cave he had seen earlier, hoping it would give them shelter. As he walked, the girl stirred and whispered, "Why? Why are you helping me?" Her voice was so faint he almost missed it. He did not answer at once. His throat tightened, memories stabbing into him. He saw his wife's face, pale in her last moments. He heard his daughter crying out for him, and he had been too far away to reach her. He looked down at the girl in his arms, her eyes closing again, and finally said, "Because I couldn't save them." The girl blinked, confused, but too weak to question him further. Her people had buried her because she could not give them children. They had called her useless, cursed. Yet this human who owed her nothing carried her like she mattered. She wanted to believe it, but her mind whispered doubt. Humans were dangerous. Maybe he had his own reasons. Maybe saving her now was only the beginning of something worse. The cave was small, hidden between jagged rocks. The man ducked inside, laying her gently on the stone floor. She shivered violently, her lips blue from the cold. Without hesitation, he removed his torn cloak and wrapped it around her. She tried to protest, her voice broken. You shouldn't." But he ignored her, placing a small canteen to her lips. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, every drop tasting like life. When she finished, her chest rose and fell heavily, but some color returned to her face. She looked at him again, suspicious, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You are human. Why not leave me?" He stared at the flames as he lit a small fire, the smoke curling toward the ceiling. His hands trembled slightly as he rubbed warmth back into them. At last, he answered, "Because no one should die that way, not even you." Silence filled the cave, broken only by the crackling fire. The girl lay still, her mind torn between fear and a strange feeling she had never known before: safety. Her people had turned their backs, burying her like waste. Yet this stranger had given her water, warmth, and life. She studied his face when he wasn't looking, seeing the pain written deep in his eyes. It was a pain she recognized, the kind that came from losing everything. The man leaned back against the rock wall, exhaustion weighing on him. His eyes half closed, but his hand never strayed far from the knife at his belt. He did not fully trust her either, but something inside him refused to abandon her. He had buried too many loved ones. Tonight, he had dug someone out instead. The girl shifted under the cloak, her body slowly regaining strength. Her lips moved, almost too soft to hear. He did not answer, but the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, almost like a smile he had forgotten how to make. Outside, the desert winds howled, covering the tracks of their escape. Her clan would discover the empty grave soon. But for now, inside the cave, a fragile spark of life had been lit between two broken souls, one grieving, one condemned. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, neither was alone. The girl woke to the soft crackle of firelight and the faint smell of smoke. For a moment she thought she was still buried, trapped in the endless desert, but then she felt the rough cloth around her shoulders and the steady warmth of flames nearby. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim cave. She saw the human sitting near the fire, his head bowed, his face lit by the shifting glow. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept in days, but his eyes remained fixed on the entrance, sharp and watchful. Her body ached everywhere. Her throat was dry, her skin raw from the sand, and her lips still cracked. She tried to move, but pain shot through her muscles. The man noticed her stirring and turned. Without speaking, he reached for a small piece of dried food and held it out to her. She hesitated, staring at it. Her people had warned her all her life that humans used kindness as a trick, that once you accepted, you became their slave. She wanted to spit at him, to show she wasn't weak, but her empty stomach betrayed her. Her trembling fingers reached forward, and she took the food. She nibbled it slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. He didn't smile or speak, only returned to staring at the fire. She chewed carefully, tasting the rough, salty flavor, but each bite felt like strength coming back to her. After a long silence, she whispered, "Why did you save me?" The man's eyes flickered, but he didn't answer right away. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the air. Finally, in a voice low and heavy, he said, "No one should die in the sand like that." She frowned. His words made no sense. Her own people had left her without care. They had been her family, her blood, her clan. Yet this stranger, this human, who was supposed to be her enemy, had chosen to dig her free. "You don't even know me," she whispered again, her voice trembling with anger and confusion. "I don't need to," he replied simply. His answer silenced her. She pulled the cloak tighter around her shoulders, trying to understand. Her whole life had been filled with rules, traditions, and punishments. Value was measured by what you could give the clan. She had given nothing, and so they had thrown her away. But this man, he asked for nothing. The fire warmed the cave, but cold still clung to her bones. She watched him carefully, noticing how his hands were scarred and his face lined with grief. There was a shadow in his eyes, something broken. She wanted to ask what haunted him, but her pride kept her quiet. When she finished the food, he passed her a canteen of water. She drank greedily, coughing as the cool liquid ran down her throat. She almost thanked him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she pulled the cloak tighter and looked away. He leaned back against the cave wall, his arms crossed, his gaze distant. "Rest," he said simply. "You'll need it." She stiffened. Rest? How could she sleep beside a human? Her heart raced at the thought. What if he killed her while she slept? What if this was all a trap, a cruel trick to make her lower her guard? But her body betrayed her again. Exhaustion pulled at her eyes, and no matter how hard she tried to stay awake, her head drooped and sleep dragged her down. She dreamed of sand swallowing her whole, of voices chanting curses, of her mother turning her face away. She jerked awake with a gasp, her chest heaving, tears burning in her eyes. The fire had burned lower, and the cave was quiet. For a moment, panic filled her. Then she saw him still sitting near the entrance, his back straight, his hand resting on his knife. He had not moved. He had not harmed her. He had simply watched over her. Her breathing slowed. She wiped her tears quickly, hoping he had not seen. But his eyes turned toward her, sharp, knowing. He said nothing, only nodded once, as if telling her she was safe. The silence between them was strange, not hostile, not warm, but heavy with something unspoken. She wanted to hate him, to keep her fear alive, because fear was easier than trust. But the memory of his hands digging her free, the sound of his voice saying, "I don't need to know you," kept circling in her head. Hours passed. The suns outside began to rise again, their light slipping into the cave. She shivered, even though the fire still burned. Finally, she spoke, her words bitter but soft. "My people would have left you. They would have laughed while you died." The man didn't turn. His eyes stayed fixed on the desert beyond the entrance. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm not your people." The answer struck her harder than she expected. She pulled the cloak around herself tighter, as if hiding from the truth. Something inside her shifted, something small and fragile, like a crack in the wall she had built around her heart. She didn't want to admit it, but for the first time since her burial, she felt a flicker of something she thought was gone forever. Hope. And it terrified her. The desert was silent when the humans stepped outside the cave. The suns were climbing higher, spilling heat across the dunes, but something felt wrong. He crouched low, his eyes scanning the sand. The surface looked disturbed. Lines and prints cut through the soft dunes, marks that were not made by wild animals. He knew these signs well, tracks of hunters. Someone had been near. Inside the cave, the girl stirred awake. She pushed herself up weakly, clutching the cloak around her thin shoulders. When she saw the man return, his face tense, her chest tightened. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice still hoarse. "Your people," he said quietly, his jaw tight. "They're searching." Her stomach twisted. She had known it was only a matter of time before her clan discovered she was gone. They never allowed anyone to escape their judgment. To them, mercy was weakness. If she lived, it would make them look like fools. Fear spread through her body, stronger than the cold or the hunger. The man piled rocks near the cave entrance, blocking the view from outside. He moved fast, his hands steady, his eyes sharp. She watched him, surprised by how calm he seemed. When he finished, he sat near the fire, his knife resting on his knee. "Why stay?" she asked suddenly. "They will come. They will kill you." He looked at her, his face hard, then let them try. Her heart beat faster. No one had ever spoken for her like that. Her own family had walked away while she screamed in the sand. Yet this stranger was ready to fight for her, even if it meant his death. She did not understand him. Night came heavy and cold. The wind howled outside, carrying with it distant sounds. The human stayed awake, his head turning at every noise. The girl sat close to the fire, her hands shaking. She thought of her clan's warriors, how their arrows never missed, how their blades cut fast. She imagined them storming the cave, dragging her away while the human's blood covered the stones. The thought filled her with a strange ache in her chest. Suddenly, a shadow passed across the cave mouth. Then another. The man's grip tightened on his knife. The girl's breath caught in her throat. Before she could speak, a sharp whistle pierced the night, followed by the twang of a bowstring. An arrow shot into the cave, its tip glowing faintly, burying itself into the wall just inches from her head. She cried out and fell back. The man was already moving. He pushed her behind the rocks and pressed his body in front of hers, shielding her. More arrows rained in, striking sparks against the stone. The cave echoed with the sound of death. The girl trembled, clutching the cloak, staring at the man's broad back as he stood between her and danger. Outside, voices shouted in their harsh language. They called her name, mocking her, saying the desert had not finished its work. They promised to burn the cave, to smoke her out like an animal. The man's jaw tightened. He reached for a pouch at his side, pulled out a small shard of metal, and struck it against the rocks. Sparks leapt, landing on the dried brush he had gathered earlier. Smoke began to rise. The girl's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Giving them something to think about," he muttered. The smoke thickened, curling out of the cave like a warning. The hunters outside hesitated, their voices turning uncertain. The man crouched low, knife in hand, his body ready. The girl pressed her fists against her mouth to keep from crying out. Minutes stretched like hours. The shouting outside grew fainter as the warriors moved back, unsure of what waited within. For now, the cave was safe. The man let out a slow breath, his eyes still locked on the entrance. The girl stared at him in silence, her chest tight. He had taken every arrow meant for her. He had stood between her and the warriors of her own clan. She could not understand why. Humans were supposed to be selfish, cruel, yet this one had risked his life without hesitation. Her voice shook when she finally spoke. "You should have let them take me. I am not worth your blood." He turned to her, his eyes dark and sharp. "That's for me to decide." Her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said such words to her. For the first time, she felt the crushing weight of what it meant to be protected, not because of duty, not because of law, but because someone chose to. The fire crackled softly between them. Outside, the desert winds erased the tracks of her hunters, but she knew they would return, stronger, angrier. Yet as she looked at the human sitting guard, his knife steady in his hand, she felt something she had never felt before. Not fear, not shame, but a fragile spark of safety. She lay down again, her eyes fixed on his shadow as the flames painted the walls. Sleep came slowly, but it carried no dreams of sand or curses, only the memory of him standing tall in front of her, arrows falling, and the quiet strength in his voice when he said, "Then let them try." The fire burned low, filling the cave with a faint orange glow. The girl sat with her knees pulled close to her chest, staring at the flames as if they might swallow her fears. The silence between her and the humans stretched long, heavy with things unsaid. At last, she broke it, her voice trembling. "They will come again. My people do not forgive. They will not stop until I am gone." The man looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "Then we'll face them," he said simply. She shook her head, her lips quivering. "You don't understand. I was not buried because of a crime. I was buried because I cannot give life. To them, I am useless. My womb is empty, so they see me as cursed. That is why they left me in the sand." Her voice cracked, her shame spilling into the cave like poison. For a moment, the man did not answer. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, staring at the fire. His eyes were dark, reflecting old wounds. Finally, he spoke. "You think I don't understand? I lost my wife and child, both gone in one night. I couldn't protect them. My arms were strong, but still I failed. I walked the desert because there's nothing left for me. Empty is what I am." The girl froze, her eyes wide. She had expected him to pity her, or maybe laugh, but not this. His words were filled with the same emptiness she carried inside. For the first time, she felt her pain reflected in someone else. She whispered, "You saved me, but why? Why carry me if I am only a burden to you?" His gaze met hers, steady and fierce. "Because when I saw you in the ground, I saw them. I couldn't save my family, but I could save you. And I wasn't going to walk away again." Her throat tightened, tears threatening her eyes. No one in her life had ever chosen her. She had been weighed, judged, and discarded like broken pottery. Yet this man, this human stranger, had lifted her from the earth with his bleeding hands. She wanted to believe his words, but her fear whispered that it was only temporary, that someday he too would turn his back. "You are strange," she murmured, looking away. "No one risks their life for nothing." "Maybe," he said softly, "or maybe I just refuse to believe you are nothing." Her chest ached at his words. She clutched the cloak tighter, unable to stop the tears that rolled down her cheeks. She turned her face away so he wouldn't see, but he already knew. He did not touch her, did not comfort her with empty gestures. He only sat nearby, his quiet presence more powerful than any embrace. The wind outside howled, and the fire snapped, sending sparks into the shadows. The girl's mind twisted with thoughts. Her clan had made her believe she was worthless, cursed by the stars. But here in this small cave with this grieving man, she felt something dangerous blooming inside her, hope. She asked again, her voice trembling, "If they come for me, and you die because of it, what then? What will your sacrifice mean?" He did not flinch. "Then I will die knowing I chose my own fight, not the one war forced on me, not the one fate gave me, my choice." His words struck deep, like a blade cutting through the chains of her shame. She stared at him, her breath unsteady. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just alive because he saved her. She was alive because he decided she was worth saving. The night grew colder, but the fire between them burned warmer. She whispered into the silence, almost too soft to hear, "I don't want to die anymore." The man's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw the ghost of a smile touch his lips. "Good," he said, "then fight to live." She lay back down, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her heart strangely calm. Sleep pulled at her again, but this time, her dreams were different. No longer did she see the sand swallowing her whole. Instead, she dreamed of hands digging her out, of firelight warming her skin, and of a voice that told her she was not nothing. When she opened her eyes again, the human was still awake, guarding the entrance with his knife resting across his knees. His figure was dark against the glow of dying flames, but she felt no fear. For the first time, she felt as though her life was not slipping away. She was not cursed. She was not forgotten. She was chosen. The first light of dawn spilled across the desert, painting the dunes gold. The human stood outside the cave, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could feel it in the air, the silence before a storm. The girl sat inside, clutching the cloak around her shoulders, watching him with wide, anxious eyes. She knew what he was waiting for. Her clan would not give up. They would come again, stronger, armed, determined to finish what they had started. By midday, the heat pressed down like fire, and the air shimmered above the sand. That was when he saw them. Dark shapes moving over the dunes, steady and organized. Warriors. At least 10, maybe more. His jaw tightened. He turned back into the cave, his face calm but his eyes sharp. They're coming. The girl's breath caught in her throat. She felt her hands shaking. Memories of her burial returned, the sound of sand covering her body, the laughter of the villagers. She whispered, "We cannot fight them all." The man crouched near the fire, picking up small pieces of metal and sharp stones he had gathered during the night. "We don't need to fight them all," he said. "We just need to show them we won't bow." His voice carried no fear, only a steady strength that made her chest tighten. When the warriors reached the rocks outside the cave, their leader shouted her name, his voice filled with contempt. "You cannot escape us. The desert demands your life. Come out, and we will end it quickly." She trembled, clutching the cloak tighter. Her lips parted as if to answer, but the human placed a hand on her shoulder. "Stay quiet. Stay behind me." His hand was firm, protective, not demanding. She looked at him, her throat tight, and nodded. Arrows whistled through the air, striking the rocks near the cave mouth. The man moved fast, kicking over the pile of sand he had prepared. Dust exploded into the air, blinding the entrance. As the first warriors charged in, he sprang forward with his knife, his movements sharp and fierce. The fight was brutal. The small cave gave little space, forcing the warriors to enter one by one. The first man lunged with a spear, but the human caught the shaft and twisted, driving his knife deep into the attacker's side. The warrior fell, his body blocking the way for the next. Blood darkened the sand, and the girl pressed her hands over her mouth to keep from screaming. The second warrior entered with a roar, swinging a curved blade. The human ducked low, his shoulder slamming into the man's chest. They crashed against the stone wall, the sound echoing. With raw strength, the human wrestled the weapon free and struck hard. The girl's heart pounded as she watched him fight, each movement fueled not just by survival, but by fury, by grief, by something burning deep inside him. Outside, the clan shouted, their voices angry. More arrows flew, rattling against the rocks. The girl felt her body trembling, torn between terror and something else, something fierce rising inside her. She could not stay hidden. She could not let him fight alone. Her eyes darted to the fallen warrior's blade lying on the ground. Her hands shook as she reached for it. The weight was heavy, strange in her grip, but when she stood, she felt a spark of strength she had never known. Another warrior forced his way in, shouting curses. Before he could strike, the girl stepped forward, lifting the blade with both hands. Her swing was clumsy, but it cut across the man's arm, drawing blood. He screamed, staggering back, and the human finished him with a swift strike. The man looked at her, his eyes fierce but proud. "Good," he said. "Now fight to live." Her chest tightened at his words. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was choosing to stand. The battle dragged on, each moment filled with the clash of steel and the cries of pain. The human fought like a man possessed, his grief fueling every strike. The girl stood at his side, her fear slowly burning into determination. She blocked blows, stumbled, and nearly fell, but each time she rose again. And each time she looked at him, she found the strength to keep going. Finally, the last warrior fell, collapsing into the sand outside the cave. Silence followed, broken only by the harsh sound of their breathing. The girl's arms shook, her blade dripping with blood. She stared at her hands, unable to believe what she had done. She had fought. She had survived. The human lowered his knife, his chest rising and falling heavily. His face was smeared with sweat and blood, but his eyes remained steady. He looked at her, and for the first time since they met, he smiled faintly. "You're stronger than they ever wanted you to believe." Her throat tightened, tears blurring her vision. She dropped the blade and stumbled forward, her body shaking. He caught her before she fell, his arms steady around her. For a long moment, they stood together at the cave entrance, the desert wind carrying away the smell of blood. She whispered, her voice breaking, I was buried because they said I was nothing. But tonight I fought beside you. I felt alive. He looked down at her, his voice low but firm. You are alive, and you are not nothing. The suns sank below the dunes, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The sand, once her grave, now carried the bodies of those who had tried to take her life again. And for the first time, she did not see herself as cursed. She saw herself as someone worth saving, someone who had fought, someone who had been chosen, not by her clan, but by him and by her own will to live. The desert was quiet after the battle. The bodies of the fallen lay scattered near the rocks, their shadows stretching long under the fading light of the suns. The human stood still, breathing hard, his knife hanging loosely in his hand. Sweat and blood stained his skin, but his eyes stayed sharp, scanning the horizon. The girl sat on the ground, her arms shaking, her breath uneven. The heavy blade she had used slipped from her fingers and fell into the sand. She stared at it, unable to believe that her hands had once been bound for death, and now they had held a weapon. She looked up at him, her chest tight. He was not her kind. He was human. Someone she had been taught to hate and fear. Yet he had fought like a shield in front of her, bleeding and risking everything for her life. Her people had condemned her, her family had turned away, but this stranger had chosen her again and again. The words left her lips before she could stop them. Why do you keep saving me? He turned his head, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he said nothing. The wind blew across the dunes, carrying silence with it. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough. Because you were left to die the same way I lost mine, I could not save my wife or my child, but I could save you. And saving you, it reminds me that I am still alive. Her throat tightened, and tears stung her eyes. She pressed her hand to her mouth, her body trembling. She wanted to tell him that she was not worth it, that she was broken and useless. But the words would not come. Instead, she whispered, I don't deserve it. He stepped closer, his gaze firm, piercing through her doubt. No one deserves the grave they gave you. You were never nothing. You only needed someone to see it. The girl's tears fell freely, sliding down her dusty cheeks. She had begged her own people for mercy, and they had walked away. She had thought the desert would be her tomb. But now, standing in front of her, this human's words dug deeper than any blade. He did not just rescue her body, he had dug her heart free from the chains her people had wrapped around it. The night came quickly, the desert turning cold. They built a small fire outside the cave, its flames crackling softly against the dark sky. The stars shone bright, filling the heavens with light. The girl sat close to the warmth, her eyes following the sparks as they rose into the air. For the first time, she did not feel like she was waiting for death. She felt like she was beginning something new. She turned to him, her voice soft but steady. You could leave me. The desert is wide. You could walk away and no one would know. Yet you stay. He looked at the fire, his jaw tight. If I left, I would be no better than those who buried you. I made my choice when I put my hands in the sand to free you. I will not leave you behind. Her chest ached at his words. She leaned closer to the fire, letting the warmth soak into her skin. After a long silence, she whispered, When they buried me, I thought my life was finished. But you dug me out. You pulled me from death. I owe you everything. He shook his head slowly. You owe me nothing. You owe yourself the chance to live. The firelight danced across their faces, casting shadows and sparks. She stared at him, her lips trembling, and for the first time, she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel, belonging. He had lost everything, and she had been left with nothing. Yet together, they had created something neither of them expected. Hope. As the night deepened, the desert wind grew colder, but the space between them warmed. She closed her eyes, her body leaning slightly toward him, her exhaustion finally pulling her into sleep. He stayed awake, his knife resting near his hand, his eyes on the horizon. But this time, the weight in his chest was lighter. For the first time since the graves of his family, he felt purpose. When the suns rose again, the desert glowed with a new light. The girl opened her eyes slowly, the warmth of the fire fading as the day began. She turned her head and saw him still sitting nearby, his back straight, his eyes steady. He had not left her. A faint smile touched her lips, weak but real. They rose together, stepping out into the endless sand. The wind carried away the tracks of the battle, erasing the signs of blood and struggle. Her clan had failed to kill her, and she knew they would not return soon. Shame would keep them silent. The desert, once her grave, now felt like open land, a path instead of an end. She looked at him, her voice quiet but sure. "Where do we go now?" He glanced across the dunes, his eyes narrowing against the sun. "Forward, wherever it leads, but not alone." She held his gaze, her heart steady for the first time in her life. She whispered, "Not alone." Together they walked into the desert, side by side. She had been condemned, buried alive, left for death. He had been broken, lost, drowning in grief. But now, bound by choice and survival, they carried something greater than pain. They carried each other. And in that endless desert, under the light of two suns, a new beginning was born.